What's up guys, today I'm going to be giving you the full taste test video of my dry aged picanha that I dry aged in bone marrow butter, and I also dry aged a picanha without bone marrow butter just as a comparison so I can compare the flavors. So let's get into it. So one thing I noticed when I was taking the butter off of the picanha was that the bottom of the steak was a bit damp, and I believe it was because it was flash frozen before I aged it, and I didn't properly let it thaw out before I threw it in the dry ager, and whatever moisture was left in the steak was sort of encapsulated by all the butter, therefore making the bottom of the picanha a bit damp. But it's not really a problem, it just means that I had to cut off a bit more of the pellicle than I intended to. And for the picanha that I didn't dry age in bone marrow butter, it was pretty much the exact same process. I just had to cut off a bit more pellicle than the first one. And the biggest difference in trimming these is that the picanha that I dry aged in bone marrow butter, I didn't need to trim the fat cap at all. However, this picanha, I needed to trim a lot of that fat off because it had a lot of pellicle on it. And once the steaks were all trimmed up, they looked nice and were ready for cooking. However, I wanted to weigh them up first just so I can compare the loss on each of them. And before I dry aged the picanhas, they both weighed about 3.5 pounds. And after 3 weeks in the ager and trimming, the bone marrow butter weighed about 2 pounds and the control weighed about 1.7, which is pretty much what I was expecting. And after I weighed the picanhas, I cut nice sized steaks out of each of them for a separate video. And I tried to keep the size of these steaks for this video as close as possible, with them both weighing a little over a pound. However, the bone marrow butter was a bit bigger. And as a binder for the steaks, I used olive oil, and I seasoned them up on all sides with my salt, pepper, and garlic seasoning, as well as some onion butter seasoning. And this step definitely isn't necessary, but after I season up my steaks, I like to set them in the fridge for a bit to let that seasoning stick and penetrate through the steak. And after some time in the fridge, these steaks are ready for the grill, and I smoked them over some pecan wood chips. But let me know in the comments what wood you think is best for your meat.
No diddy.
And after about 30 minutes on the grill, the steaks were looking nice and were starting to get a nice color from the smoke, but they weren't quite done yet. And after another 30 minutes, the control was just about ready to go on the cold side. However, the bone marrow butter steak needed a bit more time smoking. And once I put the control steak on the cold side, it was pretty much business as usual, flipping it every 30 seconds to a minute for about 3 or 4 times. And for me, the most satisfying part of cooking these is watching that flame come up and hit the steaks. And once the control was done, I let it rest on my cutting board, and then it was time to put the bone marrow butter steak onto the cold side as well. And this honestly worked out perfect for me, because in the exact time that I needed the control steak to rest was pretty much the exact time that it took the bone marrow butter steak to finish cooking. And once the bone marrow butter steak was finished cooking, I threw it on the cutting board and it was time to cut open the control. I was shooting for medium rare on both of the steaks, but the control came out more of a medium, which honestly isn't too far off. But the steak itself tasted great. It had a nice smoky flavor and a slightly pronounced dry aged funk, and it was also super tender as well. And there's no real negatives to this steak. The only thing I would say is that it wasn't really as juicy as I'd like it to be, but that's because of the dry aging process. And once I was done with the control, it was time to cut open the bone marrow butter. And after tasting the steaks, I could definitely see there was a big difference. The bone marrow butter steak had a less pronounced dry aged flavor, but it retained a lot more juices than the control. And also that bone marrow butter was able to penetrate all the way through, making each bite super rich. But to end the video, I'd like to know your guys' opinions in the comments, and if you'd like more long form videos like this. And as always, have a great day.